Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to VR Roundup, episode 9. The day is Tuesday. It is November 14th. We got lots of cool things to cover tonight. Let's dive into the first of those. It involves a group of University of Tokyo students, and they're working with motion track controllers like your Vive wand or your Oculus Touch. When you currently use these controllers in games, sometimes the developers make this something other than a controller. If you're playing a medieval fantasy game, it might be a sword, a club, a mace, a bat. In short, pretty much any type of object that you can hold, bow, etc. The problem with that is some objects, because of the weight distribution of the wand and the Oculus Touch, some objects work better than others. Some are terrible, and some are just kind of average meh. They work, barely. That's where this group comes in. They have a design template for a controller that kind of looks like a paddle with a hilt, the unit, a bunch of perforated holes all along it, several dozen holes, and then they've got little weights that they place in the holes to redistribute the weight of the unit. The idea being you can more approximate certain objects like that. So they then assembled a data group to collect data with, had those individuals put on a head-mounted display, asked them to grab their individual units, come up with perceived width and length for their units, and then come up with what they think their unit most approximates object-wise. Now, an interesting side note is that a lot of the measurements came back overestimated. Now, using proper scientific methods, the team then performed a user study to validate the accumulated data. So they grabbed another group or formed another group. Each participant was given several units that had already been assigned a perceived shape. So for example, one of the units, most of them may have thought, okay, you know what, this feels like a baseball bat. They then asked to assign them to the objects currently being displayed on their VR HMD. So they had to play matchup between the objects that they see on their HMD and these units that they had already assigned their perception to. Now, the results show that while not perfect, they were more often close than they were off. The system then crafts the various controller types using a three-step process. The first is form creation. They create a shape and a form, along with all those perforated holes, that satisfies the general size requirement of the object that they're mimicking. Next up, weights placed into the slots to match most closely the feeling of that perceived object. And then the final step is carving and fabricating that using either a 3D printer or a laser cutter. I really like the idea of this. I can see this being sold as a kit that you could mount a tracker on, along with the holes and the weights to be able to, make your controller feel like different objects. Very cool. Guys, when it comes to Street Fighter 2, I got a bit of a love-hate relationship with that game. I personally have nothing against the game. I enjoyed the game. Me, family members, and buddies, some good times playing the game. But I also associate that game with a time marker. All the arcade games before that, the Golden Age. After that game, the demise of the arcade. Anybody who's watched the channel for a while knows I'm a huge arcade geek. Love my arcade machines. Had to destroy my last one because I didn't build it with moving in mind. And I'll rebuild it, but the point being that after Street Fighter, a lot of the games, and this isn't really necessarily Street Fighter's fault, it's just a convenient marker, a lot of the games after that became quarter gobblers. They weren't concerned with skill. It was time running out, and then you fed more quarters into it. That, plus home consoles, and a bunch of other economic factors, killed off the arcade pretty much everywhere outside of Asia. Yes, there are exceptions, but pretty much dead. Well, That game went on to sell a hell of a lot of additional SNES units. They had a really good version of the game on that console. And there's a bunch of positives and negatives for that game, and this does tie into VR. In the positive column, for example, the game allowed you to look like this and still dominate a fight. One thing that thankfully changed is the association marketing had with games, just in general. In the West, up to that point, gaming pretty much perceived as a childish thing. So we got Street Fighter II commercials that looked like this. And Japan got dark and gritty commercials that looked like this. Well, here's the tie-in. Next week, the Capcom Pro Tour North America Finals are going to get underway at Red Bull's Battlegrounds. That's in Boston. Like I said, yet another ferry ride away. That's pretty close, but I suck at Street Fighter V. We'll get to the rewards for this, but the best Street Fighter V players in the US are going to enter that. The winner gets a Japanese-style Street Fighter V arcade cabinet. Like I said, I'd love to take the ferry over there. It is a quick ferry ride. However, I'm just horrible at that game. Wouldn't have a chance in hell of winning anyways. Well, Capcom says there's going to be a VR version of Street Fighter II at the tournament. What they aren't clear on is whether that is what players are going to play or if it's simply going to be on show for display alongside it. My guess would be exactly that, for show, because these players wouldn't have been able to play on that and have no experience with that format, with the game style. Now, I'm interested in seeing which way they went design-wise. Did they do a Lucky's Tale where it's third person? To me, that would make sense. It'd be almost unnecessary in VR. Or did they go first person, which would be super challenging with hitboxes, etc. But if they could pull that off, it might have the potential to be pretty damn cool. I guess we'll find out. Next up, Rift Game From Other Suns has a first review up over on Road to VR, and a second launched shortly after by Upload VR. Reviewer Road to VR Scott Hayden, like I did, felt the game was a bit of a cross between FTL and Borderlands visually. Well, like FTL, it is a roguelike. It's got procedural generation, and the idea of the game is you are thrown to the far edge of space after testing out an experimental drive technology. You and your crew have to make your way back. You do that by collecting scrap, buying, scrounging, stealing, and fighting your way to the other side of the map. To do that is going to involve a careful balancing act of servicing, upgrading, and stocking your ship's various missile types. You've also got to take care of your NPC crew. They're basically your lives. You run out of crew members, effectively game over. Now, mercifully, managing ammo, not one of the things you have to worry about. Ammo pretty much unlimited, which is good because there's a hell of a lot of shooting in the game. Both reviewers recommend not playing the game solo. They say it's a bit of a death wish, that it really shines as a cooperative multiplayer game. They both liked it, basically 75% rating. $39.99 US, launching today, Oculus Store. Next up, Microsoft, seemingly all in when it comes to virtual reality on the PC side of the equation. However, when it comes to Xbox One's VR future, they're painfully quiet. Quiet to the point they don't even seem to be pretending to be listening to questions on the topic. Upload VR reached out to Microsoft for clarification on their console VR status, they got a reply back, 130-word reply, a big paragraph that only answers the question timidly, and even then without making direct reference, and only with the very last sentence. Now, the only out that I can see for Microsoft for this kind of a delay, if they still plan on launching, is simply that it's going to be compatible with their Windows mixed reality, kind of like the vice versa, Xbox One games being Windows compatible. If it's not, with this kind of delay way too far into the Xbox One's life cycle to make the launch successful, in my opinion. So it's either going to launch, and when it does, it's going to be compatible with a hell of a lot of games, or it won't. But I guess we'll find out as time passes. And this next snippet, joining other vendors in lowering the cost of VR for the duration of the Black Friday sale, Lenovo putting their Explorer head-mounted display up with a $100 discount. So dropping the price from $399 US to $299 US. Okay, so that brings us to some HTC news in the form of a double header, bad news sprinkled with a good serving of what we already knew. Let's start with the bad news. Initially, word from out of the Vive Developer Conference was that HTC had canceled the planned Daydream-based Vive Focus for non-Asian markets. But now we're hearing not the case. But which is it? They haven't clarified. Let's assume it does turn out to be canceled. If so, it kind of makes sense given the market realities here and in China. I'll explain. There are a crap ton of really poor VR games out there. The cardboard level style games, they're ad-filled, and they typically do very poorly over here. But in China, they sell pretty well. The controller tracking, likewise, a big step backwards for the more robust VR solutions that are out there. Couple that with Daydream's lackluster library of games and no desire to launch yet another web-based game portal, and I think it becomes pretty clear why they wouldn't be launching worldwide. Alvin Graylin and HTC hope to corner the market in China with a mobile device. They cannot afford to continue hemorrhaging money elsewhere. That's my opinion on it. I think that's why we're not going to see it launch elsewhere. VR Focus has reached out to HTC for confirmation. Hopefully, we get that confirmation. When we do, I'll let you guys know in an update. And next up, a question I've been asked a lot is whether I think the Windows Mixed Reality HMDs, in addition to being Steam VR compatible, are also going to be able to play Rift games via Revive. Well, wonder no more. Word from German VR bloggers, VR Nerds, indicates affirmative. Using the latest version of the mod, they've got a video that shows how the Oculus titles can be accessed via Revive using the Steam VR beta, which is going to be released publicly for the Windows Mixed Reality users within the next few weeks. Good news for anyone thinking of purchasing one of the Windows Mixed Reality units. They may have issues in a few categories when it comes to tech-wise and tracking, but game library-wise, pretty respectable size with all that compatibility factored in. And our last story, Killing Floor Incursion, which in my opinion is another example of a successful port of a game that wasn't VR by a developer to VR. I think a lot of times, like Doom 3 BFG, that worked out very well. The only issue I have with this game has been the price point for the game. So today, it launched for the Oculus Store and, of course, for Rift controllers on Steam VR. But the price, little steep, $39.99 US for 3 to 4 hours of gameplay. Not so sure. To me, under $20, I'd be a lot more comfortable with that. I think $39, just a little too pricey. Definitely recommend you wait on a holiday sale for that game. Well, guys, that is it for the VR Roundup on this Tuesday. You know what's next? Game and Friday edition. Guys, have a fantastic week. Cheers.